Hello, and welcome to the Producers Guild conversation with Dottie Dartland Zicklin, the executive producer and writer from Younger. We'd like to thank our friends at MTV Entertainment Studios for making this event possible. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator today, Jenelle Riley. Jenelle is the Deputy Awards and Features Editor at Variety and a host and screenwriter who has received 3 Emmy Awards for her work on Actors on Actors. Welcome, Jenelle. Welcome, Dottie. And please, Jenelle, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me today. As Kyle mentioned, I'm an editor at Variety, and welcome to this PGA Q&A with Younger. At this time, please join me in welcoming the show's executive producer and writer, Dottie Dartland Zicklin. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Now, whenever I have someone as accomplished as you are, I actually like to go back to the beginning and sort of learn, how you got where you are. What was your first job in this business? The first time you felt you could call yourself a writer or call yourself a producer?
Well, the first job I had was on a show back in the 90s called China Beach.
Oh,
I was,
sure.
I was a Writers Guild intern on that show, and John Wells was executive producing and John Sacred Young. And my job was to research stories about the Vietnam War and give the research to the writers. And in the process, I couldn't help but start pitching them other stories and putting them together. So I ended up selling a story to them. So that was my very first foray.
I mean, this question is designed to sort of be humbling and show we all sort of came from the same, early place of fetching people coffee. But you started on an amazing show and were writing pretty quickly.
I felt very lucky. I worked on Wall Street out of college for Merrill Lynch in an analyst training program for a couple years, and it was not for me. It just was not the business I was meant to be in, and I always felt like I wanted to do something creative. So I went to graduate school, and one of the writers from China Beach, Carol Flint, she came to speak to our class, and at that point, I had never thought about writing for television, but we kind of connected because we were both from Florida. So we went out to coffee and she offered me that Writers Guild internship. So I felt very lucky that I was able to get that. And then just like everyone else, you got to put your head down, do your work, and then just keep trying to get your material into anybody's hands who will read it. So
that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And how lovely that you didn't end up on Wall Street and you're here.
Very lucky.
So Younger just ended its run after 7 wonderful seasons. But I'd actually love to go back to the beginning. I know that Younger is based on a book, but what initially attracted you to being part of the show?
It was interesting. Darren and I and my husband and I had written a pilot together for TV Land. So we were in competition with Darren's pilot, Younger. And Darren's pilot won out. And I thought, oh, well, you win some, you lose some. And one of the executives at TV Land said, why don't you take a look at it? I think you'd really enjoy this. And so I wanted to not like it because maybe I was a little jealous, but I watched it and I just melted. When I heard the premise of a 40-year-old trying to impersonate a 26-year-old in order to get a job, I thought that could be handled really poorly, and it was handled so beautifully, and Sutton Foster was so winning, and I just fell for it immediately, and I said, yeah, I'll come work. And I thought I had a lot to bring to it too, which was nice, being a woman in her, let's just say, some of the years that start with F.
So you've been involved since the first season, but were you involved with the pilot at all?
I was not involved with the pilot. Nope.
Because you mentioned the great Sutton Foster. I was curious about casting her, but to be honest, it's pretty obvious when you see her why she was cast.
Exactly. And I think Darren had seen her. I'm not sure if it was in Anything Goes. I think it was Anything Goes or Violet, and just fell in love with her on Broadway and said, I have to find a way to work with this woman. She's so talented. Mm-hmm. And then she even goes beyond your expectations by being so professional, so prepared, so egoless, so giving. She's a dream to work with.
I
Really.
love that. The whole cast is really wonderful. And you know, I was thinking you've been a part of so many shows with these great ensembles. I don't know if you know how you make that chemistry happen. If it's luck, it can't just be luck. I mean, you cast good people.
You do. And I remember reading Neil Simon's biography, and he was talking about casting and explaining to Marsha Mason, who he was married to, apparently, that he explained the casting process. But he said, you can't really understand it till you're in it, until you're in the room. And she sat in on a casting session, so says the anecdote. And when the actor walks in, she says, and just is the role. She said, "Oh, I get it. You don't choose them; they choose themselves."
Mm.
And it really does feel like that. It feels like when it's right, it's obvious, and there isn't another choice.
Absolutely. And younger, it walks such a fine tone. It's funny and fantastical, but also really grounded and really emotional. How from the start have you gone about maintaining that balance in your scripts, but then also in the shooting?
Well, it starts with Darren Star and his aesthetics, and he loves to be surrounded by beauty, and you can see that from Sex and the City, from all of his shows. They're beautiful shows. So we start with that palette and New York and shooting it in the most beautiful, well lit way. That our cinematographer for the first 6 seasons was John Thomas, and he did Sex and the City. And the 7th season, it's Hollis Meminger, and he took over from JT, and they lovingly light every frame of the show. It's very visually stimulating and beautiful, and so you start with setting that world that just it's going to be visually pleasing to the audience, and then we take a little license with publishing and have fabulous parties, because Darren wants a party in every show, and the publishing industry people have told us that their parties are quite that nice, but so we boosted that a little bit to make it just more fun and more entertaining. But that's all the trappings and the surroundings. But when we talk about story and character in the room as writers, it has to come from an emotionally grounded place. It has to be, she's missing something important of her daughters to be at work. If someone is breaking up or hooking up, it is surrounded by this beautiful setting, but it's all emotionally very real. And we start with that in the writer's room.
I mean, parties aside, I've heard that this is a really good representation of the publishing world. Do you have consultants, or how do you get that so accurate?
We do have a consultant, and he or she prefers to remain anonymous. And so they give us a lot of tips about what the trends are in the industry. And as we write scripts, fact check that we're using the correct terminology or the right procedure. And so that person has been instrumental, because we feel that we hear in the industry, a lot of people in publishing feel that we're spot on, which is great.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's become kind of a cliche to say like New York City as a character in the show, but it really is in this case. And obviously, the choice to shoot in New York City was probably dictated by the story and the publishing world. But can you talk about how you've sort of worked with your below the line artists and the writers to really incorporate the city in the show as a character?
Yeah. Well, as I said, it starts with Darren always filming in a beautiful location, and he's lived in New York for many years, so he knows New York well. In the location scouting is very critical in this show, and Darren's involved in seeing every photo of every option. One of our executive producers, Tony Hernandez, started in locations. So that's great that he has that background. And since then, Joe Sevia has taken over, and he brings us a lot of options. Most, I say, Darren knows, but there's some surprises. Like we shot in Tudor City. No one ever thinks about Tudors. That was Manhattan Henge when the sun was lining up with 42nd Street. And none of us had ever been to Tudor City. It's just, we didn't hang out around there. It's around the UN. And, but as I said, Darren's very involved in looking at every photo and making sure that every storyline is enhanced by a rich visual background.
And the costumes are astounding. If I was a cast member on the show, I'd be taking them all home with me.
I know, they all do, I think. They all do end up taking them home. But that's Jackie DiMatterio and Pat Fields. They created the look and the wardrobe, which all of the actors will tell you informs their character. And I think it's interesting to look at it. I know Jackie and Pat have talked about this in the press, but the evolution of the character of Eliza, Sutton Foster's character, in the beginning, she was trying to imitate a millennial. So she would have wacky outfits. There was one that we in the writer's room called it the plaid diaper. And it was these short suspenders that were plaid, and they had kind of like a drop crotch, and they were so strange looking. But she'd always have a wild hat on, and green nail polish and crazy hair, because she was trying to be 26. And as the seasons progress, her look changes and gets more defined, but she incorporates the more youthful styles into her own fashion. And the last season you see her wearing power suits, but still when she goes out, there'll be something younger and playful and surprising in her wardrobe. And I remember Pat Fields saying, if everybody loves every wardrobe choice, then I'm not doing my job. You need to have some polarizing opinions, someone saying, "Oh, I don't get that. That's not right. Wow, that's too much." If I'm not getting that, I'm not pushing the envelope enough. So she definitely does do that. But as Liza progressed through the seasons, I think you can track her fashion as evolving very much as her character has.
I actually want to talk about the progression of Liza, because watching season 7, it's so cool how it comes full circle in so many ways, and including the final scene, echoing a scene from the pilots. I know, especially in 7 seasons of a show, things are going to change, both unexpected and maybe more expected. Can you sort of talk about over the years, like maybe plans you had for the character that, changed because of whatever reason?
Well, every season we wrote ourselves into a corner and didn't understand how we were going to get out of that corner until the next season. And I think Darren was very open. I don't think he had a set. In fact, I know he did not have a set ending he was aiming for. He very much likes to respond to what's happening on set. As we write, we do 10 weeks of pre-production in Los Angeles, and then the whole writing staff goes to New York, because he wants us to feel what it's like in New York. He wants us to see the actors on set and the chemistry between them and how things are working and discoveries that are made through the acting that you wouldn't necessarily write, and then adjust based on that. We never had all our writing completed in Los Angeles. We would go with half of the writing done and then finish it in New York. And that's to me is what makes it so rewarding, that it's a process of discovery and collaboration. It's not one person dictating a storyline. We're all creating it together. And we definitely did not know how we were going to end the show. Yeah. And Darren likes to, when we have writers rooms discussions and there's a lot of varying points of view, he likes to take a vote. And it's an anonymous vote. So, so we did a number of those, but in the end, I think he wrote the final episode, and I think he took it away and really thought about it and took everyone's input, and then genuinely wrote from his heart what he felt the ending should be, which I thought was beautiful. I mean, I really did. And I think even in the process of writing that, he was surprising himself.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Did you all know sort of what the final scene would be, you know, or that's, you know, she would say goodbye to Charles and, you know, meet up with Josh, or was that revealed when he like showed you all the script?
Well, we talked about all of it. And
okay.
When the breaking up with Charles, that came out of the fact that each season someone discovered Liza's lie. First season it was Josh, and you know, the second season it was Kelsey, and so every season someone found out. And in our final season, everyone knew who Liza was. So it seemed like, oh, hey, you lie not just about your age, but fundamentally about who you are to re-enter the workplace. And there's no consequence to that. Everything works out.
Mm-hmm.
And then we thought about, with the character of Charles, he's so much about honesty and integrity. And even though he's trying to get over that initial lie, he can't move past it. Mm-hmm. He really can't. So there is a price for that original sin. And we all felt that was the right way to go. So that we honor the premise of the show as not just some bubbly, goofy, oh, let's see this woman in her 40s act like she's in her 20s. No, she needed to do something compromising to reinvent herself. Mm-hmm. But there was a price to that compromise.
So there was nobody in the writer's room who was Team Charles in that secret vote?
Oh, you know, there were some there were.
Sure.
And I think that's why we did 11 the way the second to the last episode, that we wanted to give the audience that romantic comedy ending that's so fun and you just throw your hands up in the air and love it. That we wanted that to be part of the show, but in the end it felt false to our show to leave it there. It felt like there's a couple steps beyond this. And you know, generationally, Charles is of an older generation with he's rigid. He has a certain morality, and there's a great quality about that. You always know where you stand with Charles, and you always know where he's going to stand. But the younger generation is more fluid in a lot of ways, but they can understand maybe sometimes being compromising for the right situation. And Josh always tended to have that. He was able to forgive her. He was able to roll with things. He was able to, even when she chose Charles, say, I always want to be in your life, and you're always going to be someone special to me. And our relationship doesn't have to be defined, and it can not have rigid boundaries. And so we thought there's a lot of generational conversations in the show, and we thought that would be an interesting one for the end also, how the different men and their different generations respond to the premise of the show, Liza having to lie to reinvent herself.
You know, you've been a part of so many iconic shows, you know, starting with China Beach and, you know, through Sybil and Dharma and Greg. What's been different about Younger?
Well, I was a multi-camera writer before this. So this is the first time that I was able to do a show on locations. And that's so radically different. When you're in a multicam world, you're always trying to keep things to your home set, and that's your budget, and that's what you're trying to do. But we'll sit in production meetings here and they'll say, oh, Liza and Kelsey are having a conversation in the office. And Darren will say, can we take it outside? Can we be in Bryant Park? We need it to be visually interesting. And so you're always invited to take the show to different locations, which I thought would be more expensive, but the way that you produce a single camera show, building on the set is often as expensive as renting a location.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, obviously, the final season provided new challenges because you had to navigate filming during COVID-19. At what point in the production of the 7th season did COVID hit for you, and how did you go about putting it together under the circumstances?
Yeah, it was rough, and many people had this experience, but we were halfway through writing the 2nd season when it hit, and we shut down. We were just about to head off to New York because we do half our writing in LA, half in New York, and everything shut down, and we were all waiting to figure out what would happen and when we could resume, and we ended up being one of the first shows to come back. And we started writing again in August. And at that point, we didn't know, should we include COVID in our show or not?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people were having that discussion. We had a vote, again, the anonymous vote, and we ended up not including COVID for a number of reasons. But one of them was, at that point in August, we didn't know how it was going to end. We can't say that everybody, is going to wear masks and live happily ever after. We didn't know how the situation, because it's not resolved now. So we made the decision, because in our timeline, it was legitimate that we could finish our show, before February, and in its real timeline. So we decided to do that. That was number one. And then we had Charles Michael Davis was doing NCI New Orleans, and he was going to go back and forth between the 2 shows, and he couldn't because of COVID. So we lost his character and had to completely rewrite for that. And Miriam Shore, she was not comfortable being on set, even with COVID protocols, which we totally understood. So we tried to have her zoom in and have stayed on her honeymoon in Italy with her handsome plumber and have our own happy ending for her. But she was missed, and we understood. But that was a big obstacle for us in terms of writing. And as you know, you've heard from people from a producing standpoint, it's expensive. And so that does come out of your budget for locations and extras and sets. And you're limited to a certain amount of extras, which is hard in our world with so many parties. Mm-hmm. But we hope that we managed to pull it off, because I think the season still looks beautiful. And I think you might notice, if you look closely, maybe not as crowded a room as we would normally have with extras, but we worked and shot in tight angles, and I think it still has that, hopefully, that glossy New York fantasy gorgeous feel that all the other seasons of Younger had.
I couldn't tell at all, which is why I was curious when you shot it, because I thought, well, maybe they got all their shooting out of the way before COVID hit, because it looks so outstanding.
And I don't know if you've heard about this, but the New York crews in particular are yes and. I was used to production meetings often being about, no, we can't do this. No, there's not a budget for it. Can you rewrite this scene? Can you cut this scene? That's, for me, my experience with production meetings, even for the first season when I worked on Younger, would say, well, could we shoot on the Williamsburg Bridge at night? And she's skateboarding. They're like, yeah, no problem.
Wow.
I was like, what? Yes, they're always, yeah, we can do that. Absolutely. They are, our crew just took pride in saying yes.
That's great.
Mhm.
So obviously the series finale just debuted. How does it feel to say goodbye to these characters after 7 years?
I don't think I'm saying goodbye. They, because we left things sort of unresolved, they live in our imaginations still. And I'm sure Darren, I'm speaking for Darren also. I'll, I still think about our characters every day and think about how they would react to this situation when I read about something and how we would incorporate that into a show. And so they definitely live on in my imagination, and I'm sure the other writers and the actors. And it's my hope that it's not a goodbye forever, the finale. Maybe we'll do a movie and have a spec.
I I love that you put that out there because I
Yeah,
was going to ask. So just I will vote for that with my wallet
excellent.
anytime you want to do that.
Great, great.
Well, again, congratulations on, not just one, but 7 great seasons. It was such a lovely way to say goodbye. I want to thank you so much for being here today, and thank you everyone for watching at home.
Thank you so much, Jenelle.